Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Anthony, and on today's episode we're going to be installing the Archetype Racing oil balancing lines on a 2016 GT350. We're just going to go over what the kit comes with. It comes with your 2 oil balancing lines. So these are going to go between the cylinder heads on the back side of the engine, between the engine and the firewall. There's 4 basically Allen key fasteners that have to come out, and then these fittings are going to go in place of them, and then you're going to attach the lines to these fittings. So these are from Archetype Racing. Big shout out to them for getting me these oil lines. I'm going to be figuring this out along the way, so I'm going to do my absolute best to provide as best of an installation video as I possibly can, while also trying to make sure that I do it correctly. So stand by, stay tuned, and I hope you find this video extremely helpful. Before we get started, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you are a subscriber, thanks for coming back. Looking forward to helping you out today. Another thing to note, this install video is going to be on my 2016 Gen 1 Voodoo GT350. The steps are going to more or less be the same for the Gen 1 and Gen 2 Voodoos, both in the GT350 and GT350Rs. These lines can also be installed on the Coyote V8 5 liters and the Predator 5.2 in the 2020 GT500. These lines came standard. They were hard lines from the factory, OEM lines, in the FPS 350. And the reason you're going to want to have these installed on your car, if you take it to the track at all, even if it's just 1 or 2 track days a year, is these lines are going to help equalize the oil pressure between the cylinder heads, because it kind of gets trapped in the back there on those back 2 cylinders, and that leads to the oil getting really hot and those cylinders running a little bit hotter than the rest of them. If you have had problems in cylinders 4 and 8, either or, it is likely due to the oil overheating and getting trapped back there in the cylinder head, as well as at high RPM use. It gives the oil a place to ventilate out of the cylinder head and reduce the aeration of the oil. I will also include a link in the description below for the Archetype Racing website, specifically these oil balancing lines, as well as their Facebook and Instagram pages. I set all the tools that I use to the side so that I could make a list of and document what exactly you'll need to do this repair, or this modification really. So we'll start off with what I have on the car. We have an underhood light source. Definitely gonna need a lot of good lighting for this, as you're working on the back of the motor and it's very dark back there, especially if you're doing it like a garage. So definitely lighting is very important for this job, because you need to see. There's a lot of connectors and connections that are on the back side of the engine that you need to access, and if you can't see what you're doing, then you might damage something, break something. So that's first thing, is we got an underhood light. Underneath the car, before you start the repair, you're going to put a large section of cardboard that basically extends probably 6 inches from the under splash shield to the back to behind the transmission, to soak up the oil that's going to come out of the heads when you release the plugs to install the adapters. A good amount of oil is going to come out. So now I'm going to move over to the table, and I'm going to try and do my best to explain which each of these specifically is going to be used for when applicable. So we'll start with painter's tape. You're going to need that to cover the cylinder head intake runners, because you don't want to get anything inside the cylinders, obviously. Teflon tape, you're going to need that to coat the adapters before you install them. We've got a 3/8 drive ratchet with a flexible head, and then 2 1/4-inch drive ratchets. Having a flexible head is going to be very helpful when reaching behind the cylinder heads and in those tight confined areas. These just speed up the job. I've got a 1/2 inch impact and a 3/8. Not required, but definitely speed up the process when it comes to taking off, like the cowl trims, the bracing, and then just unfastening and refastening the bolts and hardware. Got a couple different extensions here. The lengths that you may need will vary, but this is exactly what I used. So I've got a 3/8 drive 3-inch extension, a 3/8 drive swivel. We've got about a 10-inch 1/4-inch extension and about a 10-inch 3/8 drive extension. Moving on to the sockets, of course, trusty 10mm 1/4-inch drive. This is going to be used. There's a bolt for the ground on the backside of the motor that you may have to release to wiggle out of the way, as well as the intake box. You can use a 3/8 drive 10mm for that as well, but I would definitely have both a 10mm 3/8 drive and 1/4-inch. And again, the depths may vary, but this is exactly what I used. I think you can get away with a shallow for both of these applications, but that's up to you. You got a shallow 8mm socket. You are going to need that to be shallow to access the bolt for the cam sensor on the back side of the bank 2 cylinder head. Sorry, I had to interrupt that. We had an ice cream truck rolling by and just didn't want to keep that playing in the background. So next we'll move on. You're going to need a 1/4-inch drive, 1/4-inch Allen. This is to actually remove the plugs that the adapters are going to go into. I would say as you can see how long this is, it's about half the length of my finger. The stubbier, I would say, the better when it comes to that, because again, tightly confined area. You're going to need a 7mm socket. Swivel is going to help, but it's for releasing the band clamps along the throttle body. A shallow 8mm socket to help release the intake manifold. If you don't use a 1/4-inch one, again, you could use either or. You need a 13mm socket to release the black bracing that's underneath the windshield and above the engine. You're going to need a 15mm socket. That's going to be to release the strut tower brace. I think that's it. It doesn't have to be this deep. This is just what I had on my gun. You're going to need some needle nose pliers. Angled is going to help you out a lot, as well as some hose clamp pliers. Both of these will help with releasing various clamps and lines that go to the intake. You need some brake clean to clean off the oil residue that leaks out. After you're going back together, you want to clean off the area as much as possible to be able to identify a leak after the fact. Got a code reader here. We actually did need to use this, as you'll see in the video, but this is just to see, after you go back together, if you have any check engine light or whatnot, you can address it and potentially find, see what you forgot to connect. Hopefully that's all that it was. That's what it was in our case, but definitely a good thing to have. Again, more lighting, the more variety, the better. So I've got a headlight, flashlight, and like a beam light that can be positioned. These are awesome. I don't know if you've ever seen these before. These are from Grip Mat. These are awesome in terms of taking off hardware, organizing it, putting your tools somewhere that's going to be organized and safe and not going to be left, on the vehicle or in a spot, like underneath the intake manifold or whatnot. It's definitely a good idea to avoid placing tools on the engine, if at all possible, just in case they get left there. Got a cushion mat here for when you're lying on the engine. Sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable, but you're going to be lying on the engine for a good bit of the install due to the position of those lines. And then we've got a flat blade screwdriver. This can also be used to release clamps. A little bit of a prying action to help get some of the hoses off. A little trim removal tool with that kind of opening. That's going to be used to release a lot of the push pins and harness mounting plastic zip ties that kind of push fit into little plastic dowels. Some picks. You're going to need these to access some tightly confined connectors, release tabs, locking tabs, and potentially get underneath the connector to help release them fully. Pocket screwdriver, recommended to have for every job, no matter what it is. You use them for more than you really think. And then these are the wrenches that I used to install the lines. The 16 millimeter is going to be used for the fittings that go into the cylinder heads. And the 18 is what I used for the actual lines mounting to the fitting. And then an adjustable is always nice to have, just in case either the length or angle, if you can't get to one of the fittings for whatever reason based on your wrench. So definitely have at least, you know, an adjustable, a 16 millimeter and an 18 millimeter. I would say the shorter the profile, the better, because it is, space is limited. And then lastly, we've got some fender covers. That way you're not, you know, obviously scratching up your vehicle, or if you're doing this for somebody else, you're not scratching up their vehicle. So that's just kind of a quick overview of the tools that we used on this job. If I did forget anything, I'll be sure to add it to a list in the description. Alright, so we're going to get started now. First step is you're going to want to gain access to the battery. I already have my battery cover off because I never really use it. Just go ahead and disconnect the battery by releasing the positive cable. And you're going to want to pull it off the post on the strut tower here. Sometimes you got to use a little trim piece tool. And you're going to want to tuck this in a way that it's not going to come into contact with the positive post. So the reason we're disconnecting that is because we're going to be disconnecting the fuel rail in order to pull the intake manifold off the car, and we don't want the fuel pump to run if the door or the key gets bumped, whatever, and shoot fuel all over the place. So we've got the post disconnected. The next thing we're going to do is remove the strut tower brace. It's held on by 4 15 millimeter bolts. That off and set it to the side. Next, we're going to be pulling off the intake and filter. Kind of just pull it off as one massive unit. We're going to be releasing the clamp here at the throttle body, your vacuum line, as well as your PCV line, or if you have the oil separator installed, oil separator line. You're going to be removing the mass airflow connector and removing the harness from this tab, or this mounting bolt and this mounting bolt. And then there's a 10 millimeter bolt right at the back side of the intake box. And then if you have that air oil separator installed, you're gonna need to remove that 10 millimeter bolt as well. So the clamp on the throttle body is a 7 millimeter. The mass airflow sensor has a little red locking tab. You're just going to use like a 90-degree pick to release the tab, and then you should be able to push on the connector and pop it out. And then using a trim removal tool, pop the harness off each post. Then we can go ahead and release our lines. So for this upper one, you're going to push on the yellow port right here. That'll release the tabs, and then just apply backwards pressure back towards the intake manifold. And then the oil separator line has a quick release fitting. You just kind of push down on the tab and apply pressure away from the intake box. You can go ahead and disconnect it from the other side of the oil separator just to make sure it's out of the way. Obviously, since that's somewhere where you're not going to lose it, what we got to do is release those 2 10 millimeter bolts. between the airbox and the one on the oil separator mounting bracket. Kind of gotta pull the oil separator back if you don't want to remove it completely. So let the airbox kind of slide in front of it. Work it free on the throttle body side, and then just come up and out. And then set that to the side. If your car still has this kind of insulator piece, you can go ahead and place that to the side as well with the airbox. Alright, so these next few steps to get the intake manifold ready to come off can be done in no particular order. We're just going to go down the line and just pay attention, and you can always rewind the video to see each individual step. Try to slow it down as much as possible. So I'm not going to call this step 1, but we'll proceed with. The idea is to remove the intake manifold so we can gain access to the back of the cylinder heads as easy as possible. So here we go. There are 4 10mm bolts on the top here by the coolant hoses. Removing those is going to allow you to remove the engine trim pieces. You can just completely remove them from the vehicle. Kind of slide them up over each individual mount, and then slide the coolant hose over it. One of the next steps of the process is we're going to go ahead and disconnect the tank vent valve, isolate that, and remove the quick disconnect fitting right here on the front of the tank vent valve. In order to remove it, there's a green locking tab. You're going to pry up on these 2 feet right here, so there's one underneath and one above it. Just pry up on them and it'll slide out, and then you're going to push this piece right here, it'll release, and you just pull back. You can relock the tab in so it doesn't get lost, and you can kind of just tuck it down out of the way. Now we're going to release the throttle body connector, just a red locking tab again. Release it with a pick or a pocket screwdriver. Pull the connector back, and while you're in this area, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our oil separator line. Again, just a quick disconnect, pull the tab back, and just pull the whole hose off just to give yourself as much space as possible. Next, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the fuel rail, the fuel source, both the fuel rails. Just a quick disconnect fitting over here. So I don't know why there's 17 different kinds of quick disconnect fittings on this vehicle, but so for this one, this blue one, there's 2 tabs underneath here. Instead of pushing them out in order to release it, you actually have to pinch them in to release it. So I'm going to try and show you this with one hand. Just pinch these 2 together and just apply like upward pressure, and that'll release it. And then just be careful because fuel will come out. Kind of just rotate it out of the way. Go ahead and disconnect your fuel rail pressure sensor. It's got a yellow locking tab. So many different colors. Same principle as all the other ones. Pull back the tab. Push down on the releasing mechanism and pull it off. We're gonna go ahead and release all of our fuel injectors. Got all these red locking tabs. Just use a 90-degree pick to release them. Some of them are temperamental. And right now we're on bank 2. We're gonna go ahead and switch over to bank 1. You can do this, like I said, in any order that you please. So once you get all those locking tabs released, you can go ahead and go back around the horn and release all your fuel injector connectors. A second hand is definitely helpful. You might need to add a little bit of added pressure to the releasing mechanism to get the connector to release. Sometimes even sliding something up under it works, like a 90-degree pick. Make our way back over to bank 2. And to reposition the camera there. Just got to be really gentle and finesse with this portion. Some of them you can easily get off with your fingers. Others require the tab releasing from underneath, and some you have to apply extra pressure. But we've got all the fuel injectors released. Kind of get the harnesses out of the way. So next we're actually going to this line right here, in order to remove the intake manifold, there is a spring clip right there. I'm going to show you how to release it, and then I'll put the camera back to actually release it, because you're going to need 2 hands. You just get a pair of like needle nose pliers, and kind of, these ones are angled, so that helps. Just close it all the way together and back it off. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And then just set that to the side, just tuck it out of the way. That is your vacuum line for your brake booster. Making our way to the back of the intake manifold. There's 2 blue connectors on the vacuum control solenoid area. Go ahead and release those. kind of want to take note which one goes where. So on mine, the yellow and green wire went right here, and the white and green wire went on the back side. This next part, we're gonna release the coolant line that goes to the expansion tank. So again, it's just another one of those spring clips, pair of needle nose pliers, just kind of work it off. As you can see, I'm doing this one-handed. You may get some coolant to come out of here, so be prepared to catch a little bit. And now we're ready to release the intake manifold bolts that hold it to the cylinder heads. There's going to be a number of 8mm bolts along the side of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Swivel will help push you through that one. Once you release those 6 manifold bolts, you also have to release these 10mm bolts. Hold the fuel rail. It goes through the fuel rail, but it also goes through the intake manifold into the cylinder heads. Alright, so one last thing we have to do is there's a connector back here. It's gray. That one right there. It's kind of not facing us, so you kind of got to feel for the locking tab blindly. This one might take some patience, but we have it released. To remove the wiper cowl, first thing we can do is remove the wipers. They have 2 little rubber grommets that cover the bolts, and then it's a 15mm socket to release the wiper arms. To release the wiper arms, you kind of just gotta rock them on the wiper motor. Again, just be patient with those. Sometimes they require a little bit of extra attention. After you get the wiper arms off, we can now remove the cowl. It's held on by several large black push pins. I'm just going to use a trim tool and insert it underneath it to release it. And then there's one more black push pin in the back here, kind of different than all the other ones. Work the way around it. Trying to pull towards the front of the car at the same time. Because of the battery box, when you're trying to take it out of the car, you kind of have to push it towards the driver's side, and then it'll pop out. And now we can remove the 13mm bolts that hold the bracing. Be careful removing this so you don't accidentally hit the windshield. Trial and error doing this. I'm trying to show each step, but there's another one of those gray connectors. You can kind of see the red tab right there. You've got to release that tab and release that connector. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I just want this to be a, you know, true, honest installation video with no gimmicks. So we got that one released. That one was pretty easy. Kind of just pinch your finger against the connector tab and push it down. Now there is a main engine harness that runs behind the intake manifold, and it's held, but it attaches to the intake manifold through two plastic retainers. We're going to go ahead and try and partially remove this intake manifold to get us a little bit more space. So before we do that, make sure everything's tucked out of the way. As you move things, keep an eye on areas that are getting snagged, like the fuel pressure sensor. Kind of come up at a steep angle. If you feel any sort of excessive resistance, stop and double check your work. Make sure you're not forgetting anything. I'm looking at the tabs right now. I'm going to try and release them from underneath the intake manifold. Alright, got it. Thought I did. Two. Let's see if we can get this thing out of here. And there she goes. All right, so I'm going to show you kind of what I was dealing with here and give you a better view of. So these tabs attach to the back side of the intake manifold, but they're underneath those vacuum actuators, so you can't get to them. And then if you're watching this video ahead of time before you do this job, now's a good time to look at the connectors that we had to fight to get to. So you can kind of see how they're set up. You just have this red locking tab that once it's seated onto something, it'll snap into place, and then you release it and then push on the gray portion. So there's two of those. In this position, the motor is in a very vulnerable state. So what you're going to want to do is cover these up with some tape to make sure you don't accidentally drop anything inside the cylinders. We've actually got ourselves some painter's tape. Works perfectly. Don't be afraid to put a little bit extra. Alright, I'm going to try and show you everything that I did to try and give us as much working space as possible. So, everything that I did, I'm about to walk through. I just released a bunch of connectors and the harness. The idea is to get as much wiggle room with this harness as possible to give us as much clearance as possible and get as much out of the way as possible. First thing we did was the transmission breather. You release it from its mounting areas and just kind of tuck it. Tuck underneath. I actually had it, I had the first mounting point tab on the second mounting position to keep it out of the way. Next, I went along the harness and I released the first two on each side, as well as the first plastic clip on the back side of the cylinder heads. Then I released this connector right here, this connector right here, which you can see right there, this connector down here, this gray one right there, and then this one over here on the top side of the passenger side cylinder head. Alright, so we're about to release the set screws or plugs, whatever you want to call it. So this is on the passenger side. Went after this plug right here, which you can see based on where the intake manifold gasket is. It's literally right. First thing you're going to run into midway down the cylinder head. And then this kind of double barrel looking piece right here. I'll try and squeak my hand in. But there's a bigger portion and then there's a smaller portion, and that's where the other screw is. It's the same thing on the driver's side. You're gonna need a 1/4 inch Allen and a 1/4 inch drive, 1/4 inch Allen key, and then a flexible head 1/4 inch drive ratchet. Make sure the Allen fully seats into these because you do not want to obviously strip these out. And there we go. We're going to lose some oil. Once you break it loose, you can kind of take the ratchet off and then just undo it by hand. The driver's side is a little bit trickier to get to. There's a few more things that are in the way. But the first one's right here. This one kind of has like that connector in the way. Kind of just push it down and out of the way and break that one free. And then the last one is really hard to get to. You kind of got to go at it blind because you got the fuel line coming up in the way, the transmission breather, and then there's the clutch reservoir line. So what I did is I inserted the Allen key first. I have my ratchet on the B side of the engine, and then on the driver's side of the engine, you can actually sneak your arm. I don't want to move the camera because it's going to be a pain to put it back. But you can sneak your arm underneath the brake lines next to the cylinder head to kind of make sure it's planted on there. There's nothing else on the back side of the cylinder head that is a 1/4 inch Allen, so you don't need to worry about possibly unscrewing the wrong thing. Just kind of wanted to show you, now that I got them out of the car, what we're dealing with. So there's 4, about a 3/4 inch deep little Allen screw plugs. All right, so here we have our Archetype Racing oil line fittings. These are going to take the place of the plugs we just pulled out. You're going to have a flared side. See that? It's kind of got like a taper to it. And then you're going to have a just straight thread side. The straight thread side is the side that's going to go inside the cylinder head. You're just going to apply 2 layers of Teflon tape to all 4 fittings. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm just going to show one on camera here. So you're simply just going to take it, and wrap it around the threads and tear it off. Just do that to all 4. All right, so we are ready to install the adapters now that we have the Teflon tape added. Again, the Teflon tape side is the side that's going to go under the cylinder head. So just go ahead and install. Make sure your tape is good. Install the adapters by hand first. Just remember to take your time. Once you get them tightened by hand, take a 16mm wrench and snug them down. They're basically going to be flush with the head. That back one there's kind of hard to look at, but and then repeat the process on the other side. So we're on the passenger side now.
Once it goes flush with the head, stop.
Alright, so this is worth noting. We just finished installing all 4 of the balancing line adapters into the bosses on the back side of the heads. On the driver's side head, on the lower one, the most difficult one to get to, you may have to remove the cam sensor that's back there. It's an 8mm bolt. Remove the bolt, pull the sensor out, back to the rear to allow you to fully seat that adapter back there. So now we're ready to install the lines. The shorter line goes to the upper ones, the 2 closest together, and then the 13-inch hose goes to the bottom 2 adapters. Alright, so we have our lines here. We're going to go ahead and get these threaded on to the adapters. So we're going to start with the longer of the 2 lines because it's the one that sits lower. Because of what I'll be doing back here, it's going to be very difficult to actually show this part, but I will just kind of walk you through what I'm doing and then show you the finished product. So you just kind of fish it back here and get one side started. Just thread it on a couple threads and then fish the other side back. And start threading that in as well. There's no need for any sort of Teflon tape or any thread sealer. They just thread right onto the fittings. Once you get them both bottomed out by hand, you're gonna grab your wrench. An 18mm will work, but these are standard sizes. An 18mm will work, like I said, or you can use an adjustable wrench. Just gonna sneak the wrench back here and continue tightening them down. Again, with this driver's side lower one being difficult. Now we're going to move on to the shorter of the 2 lines. That's going to go on the upper 2 adapters. So just kind of fish it back here and start threading it on by hand. Get them snug by hand, and then finish them off with a wrench. Fittings in place so they don't rotate when you're tightening these. Alright, so we have the lines installed now. You want to make sure they're oriented in this kind of direction so they're not going to chafe on the bell housing or any of the bolts. And then also, if you ever have to pull the transmission out, they're not in the way. So next we're going to go ahead and refasten all the connectors. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then like I said, or like I did before, I will go ahead and show you everything that I did. My recommendation is to just start with one cylinder head and kind of get that one fully completed before you move on to the other one. So this one we've got this cam sensor at the top. Make sure you fully seat all the connectors, and if they have any locking tabs, you seat those as well. Got our harness push pins, a crankshaft position, and cylinder head temp sensor over here on the passenger side. Got this cam position sensor on the top over here. This one wire sensor right here. Seat our harness, and then your transmission breather line. And that's it. Alright, so after the lines are installed, I'm just going to go over everything we did. Put these plastic push pins in place in the harness. Connected this sensor right here, and inserted the locking tab. These two sensors down here. This one moving over to the driver's side. These push pins on the harness here. This tag's in the way, but there's that one wire sensor right there. And then behind the transmission breather, this upper cylinder head sensor right here. And then the transmission breather, the way it's going to be routed, you're going to install the second position or the first position, depending on how you're looking at it, first, and you're going to route the transmission line inside of the balancing lines. Now we're ready to prep the engine for reassembly. First thing we're going to do is clean up any mess we made. So we've got some oil that we spilled from removing the plugs. We're going to go ahead and clean that up, and then remove the tape and start the intake manifold installation process. All right, so now we're officially ready to go back together. Again, take this as slow and as detailed as possible. That's more or less just going to be reversing the steps that we did to get here. We're going to start with making sure we get everything out of the way. Make the installation of the intake manifold as easy as possible. So just get any connectors and hoses out of the way as much as possible. And then we're just going to kind of set this in here at an angle, kind of how we did to get it out, so that we can push the harness tabs back in. Get it in there like so. them into the little holes. Now you can continue setting the intake manifold back down. Kind of adjusting as you go. You have to pick it up and slide back because some of the mounting screws will actually get caught inside the runners. It should almost kind of like pop into place to where you can't really move it. And then we're going to start tightening down the 4 10mm. Then once they get another couple threads, you can go ahead and start tightening down these 8mm. Swivel is definitely helpful for this. So when they're coming out, you don't need to worry about, cross-threading anything, but when they're going in, you want to make sure the socket is flush with the bolt. Now we can go ahead and tighten these down. Get them all the way seated until your ratchet or gun kind of ratchets the first time. And then we'll go back around and tighten everything down. So we'll just go around and finish tightening these down. Manifold installed. Go ahead and remind. So we have the 6 8mm bolts, and then the 4 10mm bolts for the fuel rails that also go through the intake manifold. Now from this point forward, it's just more or less just reconnecting connectors, quick disconnect fittings. So we're just going to go from the back forward. I'm going to reconnect the vacuum actuators. Next, we're going to reconnect the valve actuators on the back of the cylinder, or back of the intake manifold. There were those 2 gray connectors. We kind of had to fight getting to them. Having the line installed makes it a real challenge, so it is going to take a little bit of finagling and finesse. You're going to route the connector behind that upper oiling line right next to the transmission vent, and the connector is right there. do kind of got to move the transmission vent somewhat out of the way. But we were able to do it. Be careful when messing with the transmission vent, as the little green piece will fall off. But that connector right there, it's definitely a snug fit now. So now we can proceed with everything else. This is definitely not an install that I would recommend to a beginner. If you don't have, you know, a good mechanical grasp on things, this is definitely something that I would leave to, you know, someone with some experience in mechanical repair in cars. So to continue, we're gonna go ahead and work our way along the side of the engine. We're gonna seat and lock in all of our fuel injector connectors. We're just going to focus on the driver's side bank, bank 2. Get everything situated over here. We got our fuel pressure connector. Position our fuel line. You want to fully seat it and then lock in the quick disconnect. And then we can position our so I moved this out of the way. So I've got this is the vent for the expansion, the coolant expansion tank. Kind of sandwiched it out of the way to give me ease of access. Just go ahead and put that on. Oop. Doing this one-handed. But the idea, there's that. So now our vacuum line for our brake booster has the room to go where it needs to go. The clamp sometimes works itself way, you know, back into a position to where it will not allow it to go onto the hose. So you may have to squeeze it while installing it. That's connected. Just make sure it's on these 10mm dowels. And reconnect our tank ventilation line. Reconnect our connector for the throttle body and our canister purge valve. And then working our way over to the passenger side bank, to our fuel injectors. Now we're going to reinstall our oil separator line. If you don't have an oil separator, then you're just going to connect the valve cover breather line. Make sure everything's nice and seated. We're not going to put everything completely back together at this moment. We're going to throw the intake on and then prime the vehicle and start her up. See and check for leaks and make sure everything's nice and secure. Okay, so we're gonna reinstall the intake now. I want to drop in the filter side first, line it up with the plastic intake runner that goes to the grill. And if you have the Ford Performance Oil Separator, you're going to slide it under that. Meanwhile, you're also going to seat it onto the throttle body. Connect your quick release fittings for your oil separator and tank ventilation. Start installing your 10mm hold down bolt and nut. And then tighten down your clamp at the throttle body. Tighten down your 10mm. Once you get those tightened down, go ahead and reroute your mass airflow sensor connector and seat it. And now the last thing we have to do is connect the battery in order to get this vehicle to start. So we're going to go ahead and route the cable. And then use your 10mm to retighten it down. We will have to undo that to reinstall the bracing and the strut tower brace, but we're literally just getting the vehicle in a startable condition, just in the event that something didn't go in right. It simplifies the process in disassembling whatever needs to be disassembled. So we're going to go ahead and do our oil priming sequence, which I'll show you how to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and start it and let it run for a little bit. Keep in mind there will be smoke coming from the back because we did lose oil and it went onto the exhaust. So you're definitely going to need to get a mirror and a flashlight and pay close attention to those oiling lines. Make sure that they're fully threaded in, fully seated and tightened. So let's move on to the next step, which is priming the oil circuit. All right, so we're inside the vehicle now. We're going to go ahead and do the oil priming procedure for the vehicle because we did open up the oil passages on the top side of the motor. I'm going to walk you through that process right now. So got the battery re-hooked up. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is you're going to push the throttle all the way to the floor. Then you're going to push the clutch in like you're going to start the vehicle. And then you're just going to push the start button and let it crank. It'll automatically shut itself off when it's done. And then you can go ahead and let go. Now, before we fire it up, we're going to go back outside the vehicle, check to see if we have any oil leaking just from doing that. All right, so it is going to be tough to show on camera, but what we're going to do here is, now I can see it, I don't know if you can, but I can see the bottom line. And then the top line's kind of difficult to see, but you can see them. Just takes the right angle. Driver's side is good. The passenger side is a lot easier to see with all the paneling removing. You can see the inner line right there. and you can see the bottom line right there. No oil residue whatsoever coming from those. So now we are good to go ahead and fire it up and let it run. All right, so we're back inside the vehicle now. We're gonna fire it up, let it run. We're gonna get outside the vehicle and just look over the areas that we just looked at. We're gonna look at both of the oiling lines on both sides of the heads. We're gonna look under the vehicle, make sure we don't see any oil dripping, just in case we couldn't see it from the top side. We're gonna double check, make sure all of our connectors are seated, quick disconnects, our fuel lines. Just basically do a once over check of everything we touched during this repair. So go ahead and start it. We'll go ahead and get outside of the vehicle. Like I said, there's gonna be smoke. Gonna have to let it run for a second. But I definitely don't see any oil that is being added to the mix. All right, guys, we are back from the test drive. As you can see, we've got no more smoke. So we went ahead and burned all that off. So now we're gonna go ahead and reassemble the vehicle. I'm gonna go ahead and show that, just, you know, to show the complete, you know, start to finish process. Keeping with complete transparency, when we did go back together and I did start up the vehicle the first time, we had a check engine light, and it was due to the cam position sensor that we disconnected on the back side of bank 2 here. In order to put the lower oil balancing line fitting in, I forgot to reconnect that. So that one is the one that you had to remove the 8mm bolt that I didn't show on camera, so coincidentally that's the one that I forgot to put back in. But in order to put that fitting in, I had to release the cam sensor bolt, remove the cam sensor, put the fitting in, and then reinstall the cam sensor and tighten the bolt down. And I just forgot to reconnect the connector. So I cleared the fault, started back up, and it was good to go. And like I said, we just took it for a nice little 5-mile road test. No issues. So we're gonna go ahead and, like I said, completely reassemble the vehicle. All right, so we're gonna start with the windshield cowl portion of the reinstallation. Be careful if you are doing this after you just got done road testing it. Everything's going to be hot. Start by reinstalling the mounting piece right here. It's going to self-align. Cutouts in the front, like the bracing right there, and it'll kind of lock into place. Go ahead and reinstall the large black brace. Like I said, we are going to have to disconnect the battery there again. Grab our 10mm. Retuck that to the side. Now we're going to take our 13mm bolts. Start the majority of them before you tighten anything down. That way the whole piece kind of self-aligns. Next, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our cowl panel trim. Remember how we removed it? We had to push it to the driver's side in order to remove the vehicle. We're going to kind of position it so that it can go underneath the battery box. Going to work on aligning the pins. And then just push it along the bottom of the windshield. So now those are fully installed. We're going to grab our plastic push pins.
Reinstall those.
And then don't forget, you are going to have that one that's different than all the others. It's a one-piece push pin that goes back here. Next, we're going to install the engine decorative trims. Those go under the heater hoses. Be careful, if you're doing this right after you took the vehicle for a drive, everything is going to be hot. You just kind of slide it underneath the hose and slide it over the attachment points. Then grab your 10mm fasteners. Next, we're going to install the strut tower brace. Start threading on the 15mm by hand first. And then take your 15mm gun. And then lastly, we're going to also install the wiper arms. That also takes a 15mm, so that's why I'm doing these back to back. If you don't remember where your wipers were on the windshield, this may take some trial and error. You kind of just want to line it up where it used to be on the windshield. Thread in the fasteners by hand a little bit. And then while holding the windshield arm, tighten down. Because the torque of the gun will move the arms. Then you can put the rubber caps back on. And then lastly, you're going to reconnect the battery. And if you want to reinstall your battery cover, go ahead and do that. Don't forget to, because we had the battery disconnected, you're gonna have to redo your clock and date on the inside of the vehicle. But that pretty much concludes this install. Hopefully I got everything that needed to be in there. Realistically, if you were to do this start to finish with no distractions, I would say it's going to take you about 3+ hours to do. It's definitely on the intermediate side, again, depending on your experience level. There are definitely some portions of this that it can get a little tricky, and you can go from having a difficult day to having a very difficult day really quickly. Yeah, hope you found it helpful and informative as always. Drop a comment down below if there is anything that you need clarification on or have any questions. Again, shout out to Archetype Racing and Curtis over there. I ordered these lines and they were shipped to my house in less than a week. And they're located out in Washington and I'm here in Florida. So that's awesome. They were really helpful and knowledgeable when I was emailing them prior to making my purchase. So I will again include all their information and links to the products in the description below. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you at the track, and we'll see you on the next one.